Hello, everyone. This is our Module 3 lecture. A little bit behind, as I just sent in the message. Like I said in the beginning of the semester, I'm on the road constantly with my job at AEG, and we're currently in a really busy season, but not trying to make an excuse. That's just the reason why I'm a little bit behind, and we'll try my best to keep up with all the classes, but it's the only class I'm actually behind, which is weird because it's my favorite class. But with that said, like I said in the beginning of the semester, it will never affect you guys negatively. And I will give you all the lectures that you should be getting, all 7, and all the materials that you guys should get. So after this lecture is over, I will send out the writers and stuff we'll look at today. And also for Module 3 quiz, everyone that's attempted at least one quiz will get 100 on the Module 3 quiz. And if you guys want to do the quiz, I'll give you some extra credit as well towards the final or the midterm assignment. Which we'll get into very soon as well. So keep an eye out for lots of messages from me over the next week or two to get all caught up in this class. But let's dive into production and hospitality writers. So again, as always, which shows have you guys seen this week, right? Usually I list my shows for you guys. In interest of saving time, I will just get on with the lecture so we can get as much content in as possible. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of the advanced process, right? So when you book a show, we kind of looked at the show booking process already and dove into that in Music Business 1 and 2 a little bit as well. But once you book a show and it's confirmed and now it's on sale, about anywhere from 2 weeks to, let's say, 6 weeks out, you start going over all the details of the show with the tour manager or production manager. So sometimes when it's a smaller tour, so let's say like clubs, anything like 1,000 capacity and less, you're usually only dealing with a tour manager. And then once it gets bigger to the bigger clubs, like over 1,000 capacity or theaters, even arenas, amphitheaters, stadiums, you will deal with a production manager and a tour manager. So here on your advancing shows contacts, those are the first 2 positions, right? Tour managers and production manager. Now, a tour manager will typically only deal with anything that has to do with money. So like the settlement process, sort of the deals and settlements we've been doing. If you were to settle a show, you would settle with the tour manager. Unless it's like really big and then you have a tour accountant on the road and you would settle with the tour accountant. The tour manager sometimes will handle other areas. Like typically it could be hospitality, it could be meet and greet if there isn't a separate person for either one of those. Or anything that doesn't have to do with what is happening on stage. And then the production manager will deal with everything that's happening on stage and the things or the vehicles that carry what's on stage. So that could be a bus and a trailer. It could be a van and a trailer. It could be a semi-truck. It could be several semi-trucks, right? So the production manager will then figure out what time can they arrive, where do these semi-trucks park, where do the buses park, are there loading docks? Are there no loading docks? We have all different kinds of scenarios. Like sometimes you have to literally park on a street and block traffic with a semi-truck and hold up traffic for an hour. And sometimes it's very convenient and you have several loading docks and you can just park all the trucks at the docks and it's very easy. Sometimes when it's an arena level or stadium level show, like Taylor Swift had 26 semi-trucks for her tour. And there isn't this 26 loading docks at the stadium. So you need to figure out a schedule of like which truck will dump like everything that's on a truck when, and then where will they park after that's dumped and so on. It's a lot of the little details and we'll dive into some of that today and we'll look at some writers as well. But so advancing your show basically means you're going over all the details of the show. And we're going to take a look at what those details are today. So the main contacts usually when it comes to the touring side is the tour manager. That's the main person that's in charge of the entire tour. They deal with the money stuff to make sure everyone gets paid and those payments are correct and those settlements are matching. So if you're doing your deals and settlements and you're sitting across from a tour manager, it's very important to be very confident and understand your deal, go over your numbers, make sure they're all right, and hopefully there are no mistakes because if you have a tough tour manager, if they find one mistake, then they'll believe everything's wrong and then they'll start questioning everything. So it's really important to try to get your settlement as right as possible, especially when you're dealing with tough tour managers, but you should always want to have good, accurate settlement. Then you have your production manager, again, dealing with anything that's on stage. Then as the tours get bigger, you have more people on the touring crew. So next, usually you will have a merchandise manager, so someone that's dealing with just the merch. Sometimes at a club level, they'll have their own merch person, and that person will just literally tell the venue or the production manager on the promoter side, so me, what they need. So they need a table, chairs, tablecloth, grids to hang their shirts on, power, internet. Those are kind of the basics, right? So then the merchandise manager will advance that part of the show. They'll also figure out what is the merch split. So usually promoters get a cut from the merch. So what percentage is being paid to the promoters or the venue? Then, not to make it overly complicated, but sometimes the question will be who collects the tax. So does the tour keep the tax or does the venue collect the tax? Most of the times the venue will collect the tax because they'll make sure it gets paid. So there's sales tax on all the merch that gets sold. And then do they need any sellers? So they need anyone locally to sell merchandise for them. A lot of times not so much on the club level, but the bigger you get, the more likely you're going to need a seller and sometimes several sellers. And sometimes there's deals. Another deal is like, does the artist sell the merch or does the artist rep sell the merch or does the venue sell the merch? When you start getting to the arena level and the bigger level, a lot of venues don't even allow the tour to sell their own merch. So it'll be only the venue's reps. And the reason for doing that is to make sure counts are correctly. So like they're counting in the merchandise and counting out the merchandise. So counting in the beginning of the day before you open doors, and then counting out once the show's over to make sure everything's matched and all the numbers are right, and the venue is getting the accurate cut on merch. There's a lot of scenarios, especially in clubs with certain genres, usually like the Warped Tour type bands or metal bands, that will skimp out on merch and they'll try not to pay their cut to the venue or promoter, or they magically make more shirts appear so the inventory is higher at the count out than it should be. So like if you're on the promoter's side or the venue side, you really want to make sure those merchandise numbers are accurate, and might be important if you think it's gonna be a big merch night. So if the band's gonna sell $10,000 of merch and you're getting 20%, that's $2,000, right? So it's definitely worthwhile having a merch manager on the venue side as well, making sure those things are accurate, because that's a lot of money we're talking about. $2,000 on one show over 100 shows a year. You're talking real money there, right? Next to tours, we'll usually have a VIP or meet and greet manager. I think we talked about this last week or last module, but sometimes that's outsourced to another company. So it could be like a company like CID Entertainment or Future Beat. So a lot of times that's outsourced, and then those companies will send a rep on tour as well to deal with the VIP experiences and meet and greets. And sometimes the bands handle themselves, and they sell their own meet and greet because they don't want to pay some company to handle their meet and greet, especially if it's simple, like right, just a photo and maybe a signed poster. If it's simple like that, a lot of artists like just managing their own meet and greet experience because they keep all the money for that. And then in that case, a tour manager will usually handle it. Or if it's a really big meet and greet, that might be someone else on tour on the band side to handle that, and they'll just pay that person instead of a third-party company. Then on some bigger tours, you'll have a security manager on tour, and they literally just deal with security. They deal with the artist's personal safety. They're usually with the artist wherever the artist goes. They walk the venues, making sure everything's okay and safe. They have their own rider, a security rider, that lays out parameters that the venue or the promoter needs to follow to make sure everything is locked down and as safe as possible. With some tours, this gets more intense. With some tours, it's a little more relaxed. Unfortunately, in today's world, it's really, really important, right? And I noticed with a lot of like the YouTubers or social media influencers, they either have or really should have a security manager, because those fans are rabid, very, very passionate fans. They try to sneak backstage. They try to wait around to get on the bus. I feel like the YouTubers and the social media stars are like the rock stars like they were in the 70s and 80s. They're very, very passionate fans. Usually not scary, but sometimes there is, some some theft threats and some security risks. And those security manager, you'll usually have reports on people that are persons of interest that could be a potential threat to the show. So it can get really serious and very scary when it comes to security stuff. So it's just really important that your venue is always super secure, regardless of how intensive a tour it is. And then the more intense it is, you obviously want to meet the additional requirements. Like sometimes you'll have to get like bomb sniffing dogs to the venue, and you have to pay for that as the promoter or the venue, and you pay for police and a dog, and they walk around the venue maybe an hour before doors open, and they make sure everything's safe and secure and there's nothing suspicious before you open doors. So very serious. And if you're going to promote shows or be on the artist side as touring, you should take security very serious. And sadly, especially in today's world, that's just something you can't let your guard down at all, because you don't want anything to happen, any tragedy to happen. So next, off on a serious note, next you have like engineers and stage crew. So again, the bigger the tour gets, the bigger the touring crew gets. So next we'll usually have your engineers, so people that run audio from front of house. So what front of house is what the audience hears, or monitors what the artist hears. So you have two separate engineers, a front of house engineer and a monitor engineer. You can have a lighting designer on tour, a video engineer on tour, and then even like techs for each instrument, right? So drum techs, guitar techs, bass techs, or just a backline tech, stage managers. So all kinds of different people that are on tour. When it gets into rigging, where you are hanging stuff off the roof of the building, especially when it's like arena or stadium size shows, and you're hanging, 40 to 60 points. That's what they call it. So you're hanging a point when you hang something. So if you're hanging 40, 60 points, you might have riggers that are on a tour. So it's like a touring head rigger that kind of manages the local riggers. So whenever I say touring, it's whoever's traveling with the artist, and then local are the ones that live in the city or near the city where the show is happening, and they're hired by the promoter or venue. So those are like usually local workers. So next we will have a tour manager assistant, or sometimes you can call it a road manager. So if you have a tour with several artists, the person, so let's say it's Taylor Swift, who she just played with at Hard Rock, was like Camila Cabello and Charlie XCX. So there'll be a tour manager that manages the entire tour, and then the normal tour manager for Charlie XCX and Camila Cabello will be road managers. They're just like managing only their artist, and in that case, they become a road manager versus like a tour manager. And they just like basically just deal with their artist, or if it's tour manager assistant, they help the tour manager deal with other like tiny things here and there. Could be hospitality, could be meet and greet, could be merch related, or anything else to take some of those pressure and workload off the tour managers. They can just focus on the numbers and finance side of things. All right, next slide. So once you start advancing a show, one of the first things you want to do is you go through the day of show schedule. 1 second. So the first thing you want to look at is what time does the tour need to arrive, right? So let's say you have an 8 o'clock show, doors open an hour early, so at 7. Doesn't necessarily mean what time is the band loading into the venue, like what time they're bringing their gear in, but what time are they going to arrive? And you want to know that because you may have to arrange parking, especially if it's like in a downtown and you have to like block parking and pay for parking with the city. So you want to know what time they're going to arrive. They're probably, if they're on a bus and a truck tour, they're going to come from the city before. Could be anywhere from a 3 to 6 hour drive. So they could arrive at your venue somewhere between 2 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning when nobody's there, and nobody might be there for hours, right? So you just need to make sure that whatever the parking situation is, that is arranged for the artist. You also want to know what time are they leaving, because let's say it's a Friday, Saturday, and you have a show on Saturday, and your show on Friday doesn't want to leave until 4 a.m., or say 8 a.m., but you have a show coming in Saturday morning, and they need to park at 6, right? So you need to let your tour know on Friday that, hey, you can't park past 6 because I have another tour arriving at 6 a.m. So those things are important too. So those weird, I'm like, what time are you leaving? It's not like we're trying to kick them out. It's just we need to arrange with the tour the next day what time they're going to show up, so we don't have two tours trying to park buses and semi-trucks, because that can get messy really fast. Then next you want to figure out what time is your load in and your load out. So what time are you opening the doors to the venue, to start having all your staff there and start bringing in everything that's on the truck and on the trailers. So that's your load in time and your load out time. Sound check, pretty straightforward. At what time will the artist be on stage, and check all their instruments, make sure everything's working. So a typical day could be like an 8 a.m. load in, and then tour arrives at 6 a.m. and then sound check will not be until like 2 o'clock because you have a lot of stuff to load in. And the artist will usually not come that early. They'll come closer to door time. Or if there's a few opening bands, and they might come a little earlier, but usually artists will do their sound check if it's a 7 o'clock doors anytime between 2 and 5 o'clock. All depends on the openers there are. Then when the word crew call comes in, so crew call is your local labor, your local workers that are working the stage. So crew calls is what kinds of crew need to be, skipping ahead. The crew call is what time does your crew need to show up. So what time do they show up for loading? What time do they show up for show call? So there's a show call. And then what time are they showing up for load out? So if you, again, typical theater or arena day starts at 8 a.m. So your crew call is 8 a.m., but 8 a.m. means that's when we start working. So the crew actually needs to show up 10, 15 minutes before and be ready right at 8 o'clock to start working. Then your show call, let's say you have a 7 o'clock doors, 8 o'clock show. Your show call will be everyone gets back to their spots and ready to work at 7:30, a half hour before the show starts, or sometimes an hour before the show starts. All depends on how big the show is. Then you have your loadout crew call. So let's say the show ends at 10:30. You will have your loadout call maybe a half hour before the show ends. So by 10 o'clock, all your crew helping with the load out of the show shows up then. You want to figure out what time are the opening bands loading in, right? So support load in. So what time are they arriving? Depends on what they're traveling in. Usually it's going to be a lot smaller than what the headliner is traveling in. You want to figure out what times are your meet and greets happening. Are they post-show, pre-show, or are they happening while the openers are on? Or there are several meet and greets. So what time are those happening, and what are going to be the locations of those? You want to have a security meeting at least a half hour or an hour before you open the doors to the venue. Then you have your door time, your show time, then curfews, or several curfews. So like one, what is the noise curfew? If you're an outdoor show, what times you need to be done making noise? And that's really important because you can get into fines really quick. I think at St. Augustine Amphitheater, where I do shows at, it's a 10:30 curfew, and once the first complaint comes in from the neighbors, it's $1,000 fine, and I think it's $1,000 per minute after that first fine. So if you're supposed to be done at 10:30, you're going over, and your first complaint comes in at 10:35, that's $1,000 at 10:35. If you don't end until 10:40, that's a $5,000 fine, right? So it's really important to follow those noise curfews. Another curfew could be an age curfew, right? So if it's an all ages show, what time do the 18 and unders need to be out of the building? And then another curfew can be a building curfew. What time does the tour need to be out of the venue? That's also really important to, one, talk about with the venue if you're the promoter or the artist. And it's also really important just to talk about in advance, because there could be issues. And I just had an issue at a show where the building and dressing room curfew was 90 minutes after the show ends. It was a big loadout, 2 semi-trucks and 2 tour buses. And hour and a half, so the show ended at 10:30. Midnight comes around. The artist and their crew are still in dressing rooms. They're still partying and having fun. They had a sold-out show. They're excited. And the venue's saying, hey, 12 o'clock, we advanced this, you guys need to leave so we can start cleaning dressing rooms. And they didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay for an extra hour. So we got into an issue there, and it ended up costing the artist an extra $600 because they didn't leave on time. So it's really important to talk about those curfews as well, like even building curfews. So that's your day of show schedule. Then next thing, pretty straightforward. What kind of vehicles are they traveling in? What and where will they park? Right. So this is like a semi-truck parking in front of the theater. Again, the street is blocked there, right, the side of the street. So that's like where cars will parallel park. So that was reserved in advance, so the semi-truck can park there. There's that Florida Theater in Jacksonville. So you need to know how many trucks are they coming in, how many buses are they coming in. There's these like RV bus-looking things called bandwagons. How many trailers are they pulling? Are they traveling any vans or sprinters? And then you usually want to send out a parking map, especially when it's not well, you always want to send out a parking map. But the parking map basically shows what goes where. And it's really important when there's multiple trucks and buses involved, and you want to just show and lay out where everybody parks. And it gets really complicated when you're in a downtown like Florida Theater. I went to the show there. So you can probably fit 3 big vehicles in front of the venue, 2 on the side of the venue, 1 across the street. And then after that, anything else needs to be parked on another street. I've done a show there with 2 semi-trucks and 3 buses. So we were literally in a scenario where 2 of the 3 buses had to park somewhere else. We needed to arrange parking for those buses and then send out a map where those buses go. So that's really important to discuss and plan in the advanced process. Then next is your stage crew and your stagehands. The picture here is what's called a fly rail system. This is something you would have at a lot of theaters. Give me 1 second. That was my dog was locked out and he wanted to come in and hang out. So that picture there is what's called a fly rail system. So a lot of theaters will have this. This is a great way to avoid rigging, like having to hang things with motors and everything. Fly rail system is like a rope and pipe system that has these different, so they call these line sets, and you can have anywhere from 30 to 80 different line sets, which means there's 30 to 80 lines where you can potentially hang things from. This is really important when it comes to like theater and Broadway, but also a lot of tours, right? They'll hang lighting on these fly rail systems. They'll hang banners and backdrops and projectors and all kinds of things. So it's important to know if your venue has a fly rail system or not, and if you need to use it. The typical people that be working on your like local crew is a steward or a crew lead. So if your venue is a union venue, which means like all your stage labor is booked through a union, there'll be like union rules and everything. So in that scenario, will be called a steward. And then usually if it's a non-union crew, that person will be like a crew lead instead of a steward. But basically the same thing. So steward and crew lead are kind of interchangeable. Then next you have your department heads. So whatever areas are needed, right? So usually you always have a department head for audio and a department head for lighting. Then once video is involved, you have a department head for video. And if it gets as complicated like as lasers, you'll have a department head for laser as well. And they'll just like deal with their departments, and they kind of be like in charge of their departments. Then you have stagehands. They can work wherever on stage, wherever they're directed. So if you have, let's say, 12 stagehands, you might have 4 for audio, 4 for lighting, 4 for video, and then maybe another 4, so let's say 16, another 4 just to deal with backlines, just the instruments. Then when you're dealing with union venues, everything gets like departmentalized. And that's really just to protect the workers, to make sure they're not getting taken advantage of, right? So that's where loaders are different from stagehands. Loaders are literally, they're on the truck, and they're literally just like unloading what's on a truck or loading what needs to go on a truck back on. And they won't do anything on stage. They'll literally just be on a truck. They'll get the cases out of the truck and get it to an area where the stagehands will take over, and then they'll bring it onto the stage. But in some scenarios, the loaders will not even go on stage. They'll only get it off the truck, get it into an area like a loading dock area, and then the stagehands will grab the cases and bring it on stage. Or sometimes the loaders will take it all the way to the stage, to the stagehands. It all depends on what the union rules are for that venue, and every venue has different union rules. It's usually the rules are pretty similar for a union in a region. So like the Miami Union will pretty much have the same type of rules in all the Miami venues. And then like the Tampa Union will have the same rules in all the Tampa venues. So there's consistency there. Riggers, those are people that are literally risking their lives, right? They're like really high up. So if you're ever in an arena and you look all the way up in the ceiling, you see like the catwalks and the rafters. They're hanging out up there. Now you have two types of riggers. You have what they call up riggers and down riggers. So up means they're up in the sky, and down there means they're on the floor. Up riggers are basically rigging and hanging things to the ceiling of a building, and the down riggers are on the bottom and attaching the motors and the lines that they're sending up to the uprigger, and are getting the motor lines up to the sky, and they're sending them everything that needs to go up from the bottom until the motor is hung, and then they can now use the motor to lift up any kind of lighting or video, whatever is being hung from those motors. So it can get really complicated there. A flyman is kind of similar to a rigger. So like, as you see here, the fly rail system, right? A flyman will basically hang things on the fly rail system and then fly that in the theater. The flyman can also be like a bricks person, where so the fly rail system like works with weights, like these bricks that they put on each line. So let's say you're flying 1,000 pounds, then you need enough weight in bricks to counterbalance that weight, so nothing just comes crashing down. So those are what the flyman will deal with. Then spot ops, they are literally just operating the spotlights for the show. So if you have a show with a comedian, or where they want an emphasis on certain people on stage, so usually the singers. I went to Guns N' Roses and they had like an emphasis on the singer Axl, the guitar player Slash, and the bass player Duff. There's an emphasis on them, right? So you have like spot operators. This is just a giant light that gets operated by a person, where they point at whatever it needs to be pointed at, and they usually have a headset on with someone giving them cues on where the light needs to be pointed. And those are spotlight operators, but spot ops for short. And usually just a standard comedian show or singer-songwriter show, you might have 2 spotlights and get really crazy. And it can be literally get up to like 12 spotlights. We have 12 different people running a light, or more sometimes. And then a wardrobe person, pretty straightforward. They just deal with anything that's to deal with wardrobe. And if it is, that's where it's important to know if it's a union or non-union venue. One second. If it's a union venue and like there's any kind of wardrobe changes and there's someone touching the wardrobe, the clothing, other than the artist, then you need a wardrobe person. You can't have someone from tour touch the wardrobe at a union venue. You definitely need someone that's local and they're a dedicated wardrobe person. And they'll usually like steam things, iron things before the show. They get all the wardrobe ready. They are usually good at sewing, and they might sew some things back together. So they're very handy and crafty, and it's a very important role as well. So those are your typical stage crew. There's other positions, but those will cover probably about 95% of your shows. So it's important to be familiar with those positions. And again, it all takes reps and practice, but the more you're familiar with the terms, the faster you'll catch on, and the less confusing it will be. And the more you sound like you know what you're doing when you talk to someone, even what might be the first time you're doing something. It's an easy way to get around stuff if you sound like you know what you're doing. Production, we're looking here at if you're in an arena or something that doesn't have a set stage, you need to figure out what size stage needs to be built. And in arenas that can be varied, literally to what the artist needs almost, just depending on what the width of the floor is, right, at the arena. But you can get pretty creative there on what size the stage is. And that's something that needs to be discussed with the tour and with the venue if you're like in my role as a production manager. You need to figure out audio. What kind of sound system are you bringing in? And for how many people are you bringing in a sound system, right? Do you need to bring in any lighting, or is the tour carrying the lighting? A lot of times on the bigger tours, the tour will carry their own sound system and their own lighting system, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they might just carry one or the other, or they might carry a what we call a ground supported lighting system, so anything that's just standing on the ground, and then you still have to bring in lighting as the venue or promoter that gets flown in the sky. So like you might be able to see it a little bit in this picture, but like there's these trusses above the stage. I think for this show, this was a Hank Williams show, we used 4 sticks of trusses or 4 rows of truss, and we were hanging lights on that. And then the tour still had some lights that were on the floor, so it's floor lighting. You need to figure out if is there any video. Do you need to bring in the video? Is it just a screen and a projector? Is it an LED screen? So what type of video? You need to figure out power requirements, right? That's really, really important. You need to be a little bit familiar with like amps. So a lot of times, just as a general guideline for like an intro to this stuff, your audio and video can be on the same power supply, and then your your lighting and your video can be on the same power source, and then the audio will be always separate. So they're usually on 2 separate power sources. And if it's a tour that needs a lot of power, then you can have one power source dedicated for video, one for lighting, and one for audio. Usually, as a general guideline, 200 amps is enough for whatever you need for audio, and then 400 amps is 90% of times more than enough what you need for video and lighting, as a general guideline. If your venues don't have that kind of power, then a lot of times you need to bring in generators. Usually not an issue at theaters and arenas or bigger, but a lot of times an issue at clubs. So if you're at a club and the artist is bringing in all kinds of video and lighting, and the club doesn't have enough power, then, and these are usually small clubs, you'll have to bring in a generator that gets parked behind the club, and you're running lines from the generator to the stage, and you're drawing power from that generator, right? To make sure enough power. If you're doing outdoor shows, this gets really important because now you have to rent generators that will provide enough power for what you need for these outdoor shows. So that's really important to know as well. Then the other things you want to know on the production side is rigging points. So how many points are you hanging? Because that will determine how many riggers you need. There's usually a certain amount of riggers you need per amount of points. So the more points you have, the more riggers you need, and that's usually dictated by the rules of that union. And it's usually like a 2-to-1 ratio. So you have 2 riggers that are in the sky, so 2 up and then 1 down. So again, the more points you have, the more you need. So let's say you need like the next tier, then it will become 4 and 2, right? Because it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So 4 up and then 2 down, and then 6 up, 3 down, 8 up, 4 down, and so on. You'll always have 2 up versus 1 down. So that's just a general guideline to know. Risers, you need to bring in any risers. That is usually what like the drum sets are standing on, or keyboards or percussion. Like so it's like a deck you bring that stands on top of stage that certain instruments are like highlighted on. It's also important to know if you need risers that need to be able to move, so rolling risers, or if they can just be static and just staying there. So usually you need rolling risers when there's like opening bands involved, right? Because you want to roll out the drum set. Because if you need to break down the drum set on stage and then break down the riser, that's going to eat up a lot of time. So you want rolling risers, so like the drum kit from the opening band can literally just like roll right off of stage, and then you break down the drum kit on the side of the stage. You need forklifts or stacking motors. So forklifts is pretty self-explanatory, but you have like a lot of heavy cases on these trucks, and sometimes these cases are stacked on top of each other. So you need a forklift to literally get these cases off the trucks and then get the case that's on top of the case down safely, because those are 1,000 pounds each. Doesn't matter if you have 4 of your strongest people lifting these cases, you want to use a forklift. That's a safer way to do it. And then Stacking motors is something you can get away with sometimes. So let's say you have a loading dock, and so like the picture I showed you earlier, real quick. Like this truck is obviously not parked at a loading dock; it's parked on the street. So if you have heavy cases on that truck that are stacked on top of each other, you're going to need a forklift. If you have a loading dock where you can just roll it right onto the dock, then sometimes you can get away with what's called stacking motors, and that is basically just picture a couple of motors that are hung on the ceiling, and there's like some ropes, but like they're really thick and wide that are hanging off these motors, and then you just wrap those around the cases. So the case that's on top, and then you can use the motor to lift the case that's on top off the one that's on the bottom, and then you can safely move the one that's on the bottom, and then safely bring the one that's now hanging on the motors, bring that back down to the ground, so now you can roll both cases. So that's kind of like stacking motors. And then backline, that's just your instruments. That's your usually not the guitars and the bass or horns or anything, but that is your amps, your drums, your percussion, your keys. That's backline. So if you need to provide backline, those are the things you're providing a lot of times. But if you are providing guitar amps, the guitar players will usually still travel with their own guitars, but you're just providing the amps. And that's usually for dates where they're flying in. It's a festival and you have multiple bands, or a scenario where for some reason the band is just not bringing their backline. Next, you want to go over hospitality and catering. So you need to figure out how many dressing rooms are there available, and what does the artist need. And then if the artist needs more than what's available, of course, then you have to figure out how can you condense that down. When some scenarios you might have to rent RVs, usually for outdoor scenarios, or you rent dressing room trailers. So it can literally be an RV, or it can literally be like a trailer that gets brought in. That's like a mini apartment. It's pretty intense. Then you want to figure out your meal times. So one's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Or what meals are you providing? Are you only providing dinner? Depends on what time the band's loading in, right? If it's an 8 a.m. load in, then you're providing breakfast, lunch, dinner. If they're not showing up till 4 o'clock, then you're only providing dinner. So usually the smaller the show, the less meals you're providing. And also if it's like a smaller show where it's at a club and they're coming in at 4 o'clock, you can do what's called a buyout. So you give them anywhere from $10 to $25 per person, and then they go figure out their own dinner. And then when it comes to, if you are serving meals, you need to get a head count of how many people are you feeding for each meal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So it's usually more as later as it gets, because when the tour first shows up, it's literally just their crew that you're feeding. So let's say you're feeding 30 people. Then for lunch, you're feeding the touring crew plus the people from your crew, from the local crew that are working the entire day. So they're eating lunch and dinner. So you can jump from 30 to now 45 for lunch. And then the artist shows up and the tour manager shows up around for sound check and dinner time. And then you can jump from 45 to 60 for dinner, right? So you can be like 30, 45, 60. It's not always usually that even, but just to give you guys an example. And you have to look at the hospitality writers, shop all those things, figure out what needs to be pre-shopped, what can be shopped during the day. That's usually what's called your runners that are shopping the writers for you. So they're out shopping for the artist or running errands for the artist. They might usually, right first when the tour gets there, they take the bus drivers and truck drivers to a hotel where they hang out at and sleep for the day until it comes around nighttime and they come back and then to drive tour to the next city. The runners will take the artist around wherever they need to go. They might take them to radio stations, TV stations for press. They basically whatever errands the tour needs, the runners will take care of and handle. What else? And then you need to figure out how many runners you need, of course. You need to look at your towel needs. So how many towels you need for bath towels for take showers, and how many towels you need for stage. So like these are usually black stage towels. You want to figure out if there's laundry on site. Does the venue have washers and dryers? Most venues do. It's usually at the club level where they probably won't. So you need to figure out if there are washers and dryers on site. is there a union rule with the washers and dryers? So if you, the tour is planning on using them, you now need to have a wardrobe person so they can access the washer and dryer. Not always the case, but the case in some scenarios. Or if there's no laundry on site, they need to figure out where's the closest laundry. And if they need to go to laundry, usually like the runner will go and do laundry for the artists. And then you also need to figure out if there's showers available on site. So again, most theaters and arenas will have showers. Sometimes an amphitheater, especially when it's an older one, like the one in Pompano Beach, that's only one shower. And if at the end of the day you have 15 people that need to take showers, it could be a really long night as you're waiting for 15 people to go through that one shower. Sometimes in those scenarios when there's like only one shower and you have a lot of people that need to take a shower at the end of the day, or there's no showers, you will get what is called day rooms at a hotel. So you find a nearby hotel, get rooms for the day where the crew can go in and out and take showers instead of taking them at the venue. Again, most theaters, arenas, and stadiums will have showers. It's usually at the club level or some amphitheaters. They may not have showers or just a very limited amount. So it's also another important thing you want to advance. Right, getting close to the end here. Merchandise. Again, kind of talked about it a little bit, right? Who is selling the merchandise? Is it the artist or is it the venue? How many sellers do you need? The bigger the show, the more sellers you need. If you're at an arena and you have 6 different locations for merchandise, you probably have 4 sellers per location, and those sellers will get paid. They're local sellers and they get paid by the tours. What kind of setup do you need? What is the artist carrying, right? So here's like the merch for Guns N' Roses. Usually tours that big, they're carrying their own grids, especially when you need that many. So they'll carry their own grids. And usually with tours that big, you have merchandise trucks. So it's like a semi-truck that literally has just merchandise, nothing else. And then figure out what the merch split is, which we talked about. I'm gonna run a little bit through the last couple of slides. So I want to take a look at least one. When I take a look at least one of these writers that I have for you guys, and I'm gonna send them out. I have 3 different writers, but meet and greet, super straightforward. How many people are attending the meet and greet? Who sold it? Was it the artist that sold it, or was it the venue that sold it? What is the location of the meet and greet, and what does it entail? So here is a picture of like Heather McMahon doing a meet and greet, and it's on stage, and it's just in front of like a step and repeat. So this little backdrop that you see, it's called a step and repeat, and you're just taking a picture in front of that. It can be as simple as that, or it can be very elaborate with sound check parties or acoustic sets and dinner and goodie bags with signed posters or other kind of swag. So it can get very elaborate and detailed. Security, you want to figure out what type of crowd it is coming to the show. Is it a crowd that is a little bit more mellow and doesn't really need a lot of security requirements, or is it something that's like a metal show or a hip hop show or EDM, and security gets a little more intense because there might be lots of drug use at the show, or people might be carrying guns and knives, and you make sure those aren't coming into the venue. Will there be moshing? Will the crowd mosh? You need to schedule proper security to deal with mosh pits. Will there be crowd surfing? You need proper security for those things. If it's an EDM show, sometimes a list of things that can come into the venue can be really ridiculous, but you're trying to keep the audience safe and your staff safe, and that's why you're trying to prevent certain things, right? So some examples would be on an EDM show, like the crowd can't bring in open packs of gum, open packs of cigarettes, right? They need to be sealed packs of things, because people hide their drugs everywhere in all kinds of places that you may not be able to imagine, or you probably can imagine. I don't know. But what type of crowd is it? What kind of potential security risks do you have? You need to provide a barricade, so a barrier between the audience and the stage. Are there any persons of interest, right? So something we talked about earlier. Potential stalkers, potential people making threats to the artist. So you need to know that. what is the photo and video policy? So are people in the audience allowed to take photos and videos? And if so, on what types of devices? So is it only cell phones? So can they bring in and can't bring in? So usually it's just cell phones, photo and video, and they can't bring in any iPads, professional cameras or cameras with detachable lenses, right? That's like the standard. Some people will try to bring in recording devices, like usually on the hippie jam band type stuff. That's totally okay. They can bring those in. And then what else on photo video? And then sometimes on comedy shows, a lot of times on comedy shows, I don't know if anybody's ever been to a comedy show, but you have this thing called yonder bags. So those are these bags that you put your cell phone in, it gets sealed up, and you can't access your cell phone during the show. So you have to put it on silent or turn it off. You put it in these bags, they get sealed. You go enjoy the show and actually talk to each other and have conversations versus looking at your phone. And then when you leave, those bags get unlocked, and then you have your phone again. But you carry your phone with you the entire time. It's just locked in this bag that you can't open up until you leave. And there's also like a fee if you break the bag and just rip your phone out. So you have to be careful. Yeah. So those are usually on comedy shows. So people aren't taking video of a show that they might be doing for a new special that's coming out, right? So they don't want that stuff on YouTube. And then credentials is kind of straightforward. For a show, you want everybody to be on some kind of pass or badges. So when it comes to credentials, the tour usually has these laminates that they carry. Those are the tour laminates, and then you usually have like stickies. Those are like stickers that stick on a shirt or pants, and you have stickies for like your VIP guests, for anyone that can come backstage. You have stickies for the local crew, so people are working locally, or stickies for like people taking photos. So I call it a photo pass. So that's that. Then let's take a look at some writers. Let's see. So new share. I'm going to start with this one real quick. So this is for a band called The Weeks. So this is an example of a band that would be probably playing in a club, right? So this is like kind of their rules and their legal jargon. This is kind of just the introduction of the writer. Just general terms, payment settlements usually on there, right? So you need to be paid in cash or check on the night of performance, no money orders, any other arrangements must be made with the agent approval. So like, how's payment working, how do comp tickets work, so free tickets, merchandise rules, who's selling, and so on. You need to provide a well-lit area for merch, support. Here's your hospitality writer, right? So we talked about so you need to provide a meal for 6 people or a buyout of $120, so $20 per head, so per band and crew. So it's 120 total. So those are acceptable for dinner because it's what they need. So it's a pretty simple, straightforward writer. They literally just have like their essentials of what they need. Usually in clubs there are smaller. Here is just sound system requirements, what kind of sound system you need to provide. Security requirements, again, also pretty simple. Here's your photo and video policy. So no electronic recordings of the artist's performance can be made without prior knowledge or consent. Photographs are allowed, but must be used for personal use. So that's where like professional cameras come in. Accommodations, so they're asking for the promoter to provide hotel rooms and parking, right? So kind of we talked about that, and just the agent contact, and then the advance contact. So this is the tour manager. So this one's pretty simple, easy. So let's now take a look at something a little more complicated. This is, where is it? Let me close this out. Let's see, let me try sharing again. Sorry, you guys can probably see it, but I can't see it. So let me pull it up for me. All right, here's a writer for a band called Yacht Rock Review. So the first one was 3 pages. This one's now a 7-page writer. So again, your introduction, purchaser responsibilities. So the purchaser is the promoter or the venue. Stage, sound, and lighting requirements. So here's, if you were to bring in a stage, there's no set stage at the venue. It needs to be 30 feet wide by 24 feet deep, and 24 inches high. So at least 2 feet high, which is not very high at all. You here you need to provide an 8x8 drum riser, right? So a riser where the drums stand on. All outdoor stages must be covered. Let's see, keep going. Here is your labor call, so your crew call. So you have 2 stagehands, 2 truck loaders. If the venue is a non-union house, the labor call shall be 4 stagehands, right? So again, they separated for union 2 and 2 because the loaders at some unions will not go on stage. They'll literally only be on a truck. Then let's see, vending or distributing merchandise. So here's kind of just their merchandise regulations. Security, a little bit more detail, but still only down to a paragraph, so no separate like security writer. Purchaser provides an on-site point of contact, right? So if it like is an AEG show, that would be me. I'll be the promoter, rep, and production manager. So some kind of rep needs to be on site. If it's a venue, then it'll be like usually the tech director or production manager for the venue or tech coordinator that's there all day. Smoking policy, so we have a smoking policy. So it looks like probably no smoking inside the venue, so it needs to be non-smoking. Walk-in, pre-show, separate. So this is just the music that needs to be played in between the show. Hotel accommodations, so you need to provide hotel rooms. Dressing rooms and catering requirements. So here it gets a little more detailed, right? Than the last one we saw. So here you're providing 10 hot meals, 10 salads, and a bunch of other things. See if there's anything weird that stands out. Gatorade, local craft beer. They want Pilsner, so there's like a certain type of beer. Local craft brew, pale ale or IPA. Bottle of Kettle One or Tito's vodka. Sodas. This is also still a pretty simple and straightforward writer. This looks like the backline list. So if the artist is providing the backline, this is what they're coming with. If you need to provide the backline as the venue or promoter, this is what you need to provide. And it's a big long list, right? And then here is just their stage plot. So here's their input list. How many channels are they using on a soundboard? So it looks like they're using 32 channels. Here's a stage plot of what everything looks like. You see the drums are on a riser here, and the keyboards are just on the floor, so they're not on a riser. You have how many stands you need, tour manager, production manager contact, and that is this one. Now let's take a look at one more. Again, I'm sending you guys all of these writers. So another step up. This is Sublime with Rome, and there's now is a 49-page writer. Here's a table of contents, because that's how big the writer is. So it kind of gives you a bunch of just an overview of where everything can be found. You have all of your contacts here for management, booking agent, tour manager, and so on. So again, you start having more contacts the bigger the shows gets, right? Here's a separate person for merch. Here's a tour manager / front of house. So the tour manager runs sound. You have a road manager, so that's probably the assistant to the tour manager. Business management, so you might settle the show remotely with the business manager. Publicist contacts, and in case there's any legal issues. You have that. Introduction, general conditions of the contract. Control of production, so artists shall have sole and exclusive control of the production, right? It's their production. You're just the venue that's renting out the venue to the artist. Method of payment, so you have to pay a 50% deposit unless you, again, anything that's on a writer doesn't have to be spot on. It's always all per advance and budget is what we say. So as was budgeted in the contract or the deal, and then you go over the advance, right? And usually it's based on what the venue is capable of. If you're in an outdoor space, then you're usually providing everything that they need. If you're in a venue, you're kind of constrained a little bit to what the venue can do. So everything's negotiable on these things. They're requesting a wire transfer. So they don't want any cash or a check at the end of the show. They just want everything to be wired to their business. Here's some rules of taxes and deductions. So no admission tax shall be deducted from the gross box office receipts. So we have GBOR, which you guys should be familiar with now. Before computing percentages due unless the amount of tax is stated on the face of the contract. So Florida, you're not really taking anything out besides sales tax. And then there's certain states, like I ran into this when I did a show in North Carolina, where the venue takes out a state income tax that gets paid to the state of North Carolina. So that needs to be discussed in advance. It should be on the contract. So it's important to know when you're doing shows in different states, what rules are there when it comes to taxes. Really, really important to know. Ticket printing and manifest. So this talks about that. That you need to provide what's called an audit that kind of shows what was sold. Obstructed view seats. So no sale of seats which are located on the side or behind the stage shall take place without prior written permission of the artist. So any seats where the fans might not be able to see the entire production are considered obstructed view seats. And I'm not sure if you guys ever like bought a ticket on Ticketmaster or whatever, but those tickets are labeled and they need to be labeled. It'll tell you, hey, if you buy this ticket, your view is obstructed. So you can't see everything that's on stage. Discrimination and handicap seating. So it talks about that. You can't discriminate and you have to provide handicap seating. How do complimentary tickets work and how many complimentary tickets are available. You need to provide a press box where media can hang out at in the arena. Ticket counts. So ticket counts go to a tour manager every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Then percentage calculations. So it just goes in here, some details on calculating percentages. That's why deals and settlements are very important. There's lots of little rules when it comes to that. So you guys take a look at that. Advertising and billing. So billing, how does the show need to be listed, right? So you can't just say Sublime on your flyers. It needs to say Sublime with Rome everywhere the show is advertised. Endorsements, you can't bring in any outside sponsors unless it's approved by the artist. Bios, interviews, and photographs, you can't make the band do interviews. It'll also go through their publicist. You as the venue or promoter, you need to make sure you have all the proper permits and licenses to do a show. Building restrictions, city ordinances, you need to let the tour know. So we talked about curfews, right? That's kind of where that falls into place, like what time does the show need to be over by. This part just goes into having proper insurance, merchandise, we talked about that. See, all the stuff gets a little longer and more detailed. Photo and video policy, so make sure you guys look through that. Musicians unions, talks about if there's any unions for musicians. International dates, force majeure is really important. This is what happens in case someone gets sick, ill, there's a death in the family or death in the band. What happens if there is a riot or a strike, or like here it says act of God. So what happens if there's a tornado all of a sudden, or an earthquake or a hurricane, right? So what happens to the show? What happens to all the liability? Inclement weather. So sometimes just because there's bad weather doesn't mean it's a force majeure. So it's important to know that when you're the promoter. What's the cancellation policy? Termination policy, indemnification. Going through it fast because there's a lot of pages and I don't want to run too much longer. Trying to keep these to an hour for you guys. Indemnification, make sure everybody's protected and doesn't get sued over what somebody else is doing. Representation and warranties. Third-party agreements, you can't pass this contract off to someone else. The artist is an independent contractor and not a partner. Notices if there's any issues, you need to notify the manager, Mike Brown, or the agent, Heath Bomar. There's some miscellaneous things. Anticipatory breach, so if there's an anticipation that there might be a breach of contract, when you're in the advanced process and you're not, as the promoter or venue, you're refusing to provide something, then that could be an anticipatory breach of contracts. How does that get handled? Tech writer confidentiality, so all of this is confidential. The agent, Heath Bomar, allowed me to share this with you guys, so we're safe. Then here, now we get into the tech writer section, right? So here is all the tech stuff. The tour manager, Mike Sutherland, handles all of that. Show needs to be advanced at least 2 weeks out. Same thing we saw earlier, purchaser or the promoter needs to have a representative there. Here it talks about your runners. So you have 2 production runners. Snow removal if applicable. Parking and traffic departments, they're coming with 2 tour buses, 2 semi-trucks, 2 support buses with trailers, and 2 runner vehicles and 4 car spaces for management. So here we have, let's see, you have 4 buses and 2 semi-trucks, right? So you need to figure out where you're parking all of that stuff. Shore power, so this is power for the buses. So all the buses have generators on them. So, you know, like the artist hangs out on the bus. They have like literally like their TV there in their living room in a small kitchen or whatever. And that stuff takes power. So they usually have a generator. So it usually all works when the bus is on, but obviously you don't want to be running on fuel the entire time. So you might have a generator on the bus. So you're running your generator, but to help save on that, a lot of venues will provide shore power, and that's just a 50 amp circuit that will provide power for the bus, so they don't need to run on their generator or fuel. So that's a little more like eco-friendly if you're able to provide shore power. When they need venue availability and access, some things on cell phones, air conditioning and heating, so it usually gets into what temperature needs to be what like. Rigging, the tour will not be carrying rigging materials, so you need to provide all the materials for rigging, which is like the motors and the chains. Talks about non-arena style venues if they're not an arena. Arena, so here's the stage, it needs to be 48 by 48 and 4 feet high. Sound wings, so you're providing wings on the stage, so additional space where other stuff might be standing on. Your PA requirements, your dressing room requirements, stairways and ramps onto the stage, clearance, barricades, and provide barricades, right? So some notes on that. House mix positions, where the sound person and lighting person are running their boards from. Power requirements, we talked about that, right? So here you have your 200 amps for sound, we talked about, and 400 amps for lighting. Generator contingencies, in case you need to provide a generator. Let's just run through this a little bit more. Here's your stage crew requirements we talked about. So here you have your steward, right, or a stage manager. Electrician is usually like the headlighting person. You have 10 stagehands. You have 6 riggers, so 4 up and 2 down. That's that 2-to-1 ratio. 4 truck loaders. You have a forklift operator. 2 runners. They need to have a 15-passenger van, so you're providing all that. And security at load-in for the entrance to the building and for the bus. Here's your show call, so 30 minutes before show, like we talked about earlier. So this is just the crew you're providing for just the show. A lot more condensed on what you're providing for load in and load out. And your call time for load out is 15 minutes before. You have 2 spot ops for the show, right, which we talked about. Security requirements, so this gets a lot more thorough, right? So now you have, almost 2 pages for just security. And this is all still security. The security personnel you need to provide, so it's 3 pages of security almost. Doors, so again, before you open doors, you need to run that by the artist production manager. They give the go-ahead to open the doors. Support act, master ceremonies is just making announcements from the stage. So here's like their rule of making stage announcements. Let me see, supplies you need to provide, so fire extinguishers and so on. You need to give them a list of nearby gyms. So usually they prefer a Gold's Gym. Laundry, if there's laundry available. If not, then what happens? You have handicapped seating areas. You have medics at the show. Backstage passes, how does that work? These are all the dressing rooms requirements that they have. So you need 6 dressing rooms. They need to have a separate production office. These are some things they would like to have in their production office. General note on all artist rooms. Local backline, if you're providing backline locally. Here they have 3 different risers, right? So a riser for the drums, riser for DJ, riser for keys. So it gives you an example of the different types of risers. Here is the backline rider. So that's what the artist is providing if they're not flying in and they're on their bus and trucks. And if they are flying in, that's what you need to provide. Here is their sound requirements. So again, if they're on tour, they're probably providing this. If they're flying in, then you need to provide it. Here's a stage plot, input list. Wow, we're only on page 36 out of 49. This is a ridiculous one. Lighting notes. Here is their hospitality rider. So a bunch of rules on that. So here, breakfast for 48 people, lunch for 48 people. So these are just some parameters and requirements. So usually at this level, you'll have a caterer. You'll send this part to the caterer and they'll put together a menu based on their requirements. You're providing after show meals for 12 people. So these are usually for people that may not go eat one of the meals. Here is for band dressing room 1, so specific rider requirements for that dressing room. So a big list for just that one room. Let me see if any interesting stands out. Yerba mate, that's like on a lot of riders these days. You always see LaCroix, IPAs a lot, bottle of Jack Daniels, a bottle of vodka, a bottle of wine, That's just for one dressing room. Then is crew dressing room. So here's what we're providing for the crew. So doesn't look like there's any alcohol on there. So, oh, here's Bud Light. Stage and coolers, providing coolers in certain locations for the stage. Here is what needs to be in the production office. 2 packs of Camel Blues. Looks like the production manager likes to, or the tour manager likes to smoke Camel Blues. Loadout drinks, what are you providing at loadout? Then you have a bus stock. What are you stocking the bus with? Sometimes here they're asking for just a buyout, so it's called a bus buyout. Driver meals, so meals for the drivers, and we're getting closer to the end. Indemnification agreement. Here, when you're advancing the show, here you're filling in information as the rep, and that's it. Wow, that was a good example. I'm gonna send these examples out to you guys. For the quiz, as I mentioned, it's gonna be extra credit. We're gonna look at VIP lifts on deals and settlements. So I'll send that out hopefully ASAP. And then what else? And you guys can do it for just extra credit. Everyone that has attempted at least one of the first 2 quizzes will get 100 automatically. Since I am late, so it's my fault, and you guys are don't need to be punished because I am late. These writers, when it comes to the final exam, those writers are going to be really important. So it's definitely important for you to take a look at these writers, save them on your computers, because there will be questions on those writers that we just looked at on your final exam. So keep that in mind. So definitely read through those. If you guys have any questions on the writers, feel free to reach out and let me know. Again, best way to reach me is on Canvas or on email. And thank you all for your patience and for joining and watching this lecture. And if you want extra credit on, I guess usually I do extra credit on the quiz. So if you want additional extra credit on just the quiz part, if you leave a comment on the video of which shows you've seen this week, and then comment on someone else's comment, I will give you all extra credit, trying to get you guys to engage with one another. But that is it for hospitality and production writers. It's a lot of stuff. Definitely familiarize yourself with those writers. If you want to listen to a podcast that's related to this, the last one I did with Adam Ross, I may have sent that to you guys, but he kind of knows what I do for AEG in New Orleans. So that gives you a good example of that. And with that, wish you guys all an awesome day and a great rest of the week. And we'll talk soon. Take care.